you know, all sorts of high value vehicles. If you can't prove the job you do, if you can't show us the receipts, if you can't do all that, we've got to make sure the law is there to take the assets off them. It is becoming much more complex, and some of these issues we have to work in Europe, and I've been to see Europol, because we've now got foreign gangs. So as I say, there are some of them who are brazen, and we do have to make sure the power's there. There are an awful lot of smarter ones are not brazen. They're actually quite astute and quite clever as an American mafia, and that's why, as I say, it's not simply a police matter. We need sophisticated IT staff, we need forensic accountants, we need to follow the paper chain, we need to follow the money trail, because it can be in a bank in Ukraine and switched into Dubai, then it's out, then it comes into the Royal Bank of Scotland here, and then it's switched across to the Cayman Islands, and it's back at H-Boss 2 doors down from the RBS. It's very complicated, but take them on we must, because this is unacceptable in a democracy. They distort legitimate business. People go out and borrow to open a shop, or to run a pub, or to run a taxi. And then somebody moves in and is able to plate numerous cars, able to pay a driver, able to, you know, frankly just launder cash. This is about protecting the good and honest citizen, which is why we've got to tackle this. So the powers in regard to Tam McGraw, frankly, the powers weren't adequate, and that's why we've sought to remedy that, because we couldn't take his pub off him, because he'd bought it before the 12 years. And as I say, our view is, if you're involved in a lifetime of crime, then we should be able to take your assets back throughout your lifetime.
I noticed that there was a bill about reforming the judiciary, giving more power to the Lord President. I wonder, given how aristocratic Scotland's judiciary is, but whether you think that that's the best way to proceed, and that in fact, given the complex adjudications involving human rights, which, whether you think that we or not, do involve a high level of judicial discretion, we ought perhaps to proceed towards a more democratic checking, perhaps parliamentary testing of who gets appointed to the upper echelons of the judiciary.
That's a reasonable question. I was having a cup of coffee with the Lord President, the Lord Justice Clark. I don't know if Arthur Hamilton and Brian Gilbert views themselves as aristocratic. Certainly they probably didn't go to state schools, and neither of them did. So some of these things were done. I think we're remarkably well served by our judiciary. I think there's a younger generation coming through that's also going to add significant value, not to denigrate what's gone in the past. I also think that it's important in any democracy that you have a separation of powers between government, legislature and judiciary. And the judiciary bill is about entrenching those powers within the under the Lord President in a sort of pyramid structure now, and I think that's appropriate rather than be managed by Scottish Court Service or Accountable Me. I think it should be dealt with there. In terms of how we, I think to some extent it's a matter of educating the, allowing educating the judiciary, because it implies hands-on, but allowing them to, you know, improve themselves as they do. But I think, you know, the system in Scotland is very well. The only point in which we have a slight dispute with the judiciary is that they wish to have, I think, are arguing for a majority of the judiciary in terms of the appointments panel. We're sticking behind the independent panel of senior appointments that says no, it shouldn't. I don't think that necessarily we'd be well served by what might be perceived as self-appointment. I think that's better dealt with by independent people, and so Neil McIntosh is not a supporter necessarily of this government, but him and the others who sit on the board do a good job. But I think the separation of powers, whether you go back to the American Revolution or French Revolution, I think you have to separate these things out. And the judiciary bill's actually got cross-party support and is fairly benign, and I think, as I say, I think whatever perception there is of the judiciary, I have to say I think it is changing. When I first started practicing a lawyer, there were no female judges. That's changed. In fact, we're now in a situation where the majority of people going into the legal profession are females. That's a good thing. We still haven't made the breakthrough in terms of ethnic minorities. That will change. There's still a preponderance towards perhaps the private schools, but partly that's because of where people have come from. So I don't necessarily lose any sleep over that. I think these things will change and evolve as Scotland changes and evolves, and I think we're actually remarkably well served by our sheriffs. I've had my run-in with them in the past. I keep saying to the civil service, when I was a young lawyer, I thought sheriffs were all know-nothings who sat there in the ivory tower, so I've now got a situation, I've got many personal friends who are sheriffs. I realise it's a cold, difficult job. See, when I was in opposition, I used to think the civil service were sitting in St Andrew's House drinking tea and reading the papers. Instead I get there and I realise an awful lot of really smart folk doing a tremendous amount of work. So as I say, I think the judiciary bill is a good thing, and I think separating it is important in any democracy.
you're very careful to say, you know, it's not our job to tell judges what to do. But how, if you are seeking to reduce the prison population, which you clearly are, how are you going to do that without curtailing?
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, actually, in terms of sentencing guidelines, we do think that we've called for a sentencing council with teeth as exists in New Zealand or ever. Anybody who appears before a sheriff or judge, ultimately that decision on what the sentence should be made by the sheriff or judge, because each individual coming before you is different, the facts are different. I do think, though, that in any democracy, comes back to the point alluded there, in any democracy, I think it's not just the right of the judiciary to say the tariff for X should be this or that. I think, actually, the general public should have some opportunity to say, as a people, we think this crime is very serious, and we think this crime is less serious, and we think this one should be that. So therefore, we're actually quite taken by what exists in New Zealand, where you say, for example, we think the tariff for X should be between A and G. You don't necessarily say what it has to be, because otherwise you would abolish the judiciary and just bring in a computer program and plug it in. So you always have to move away from that. But that would give an indication, which I think our people are entitled to. A sentencing council could include representatives not just of the judiciary and of the police and the prison service. You can include representatives from victim support or whoever else should be able to say this is where we think. But in terms of people going to prison, I think the real policy is people don't get a faith in community sentencing. And I think there's two matters that we have to overcome here. One, we have to make sure that actually when it's delivered, it is delivered. The point I was making with Henry McLeish, who's chairing the prison, which is a very valid point. You appear in Edinburgh Sheriff Court tomorrow and you give a sentence of imprisonment. Wham! That's it, in the van and away. You get given 120 hours community service. Somebody gives you a note to say, come and see me in a fortnight. Why should that be? You know, maybe that's one of the reasons. You get given 120 hours community service, that's it, out the door, unless you say, look, we've got the work to go to, or something like that. It should be sentence starts, so we've got to deliver that. We've also got to persuade people that actually community sentences are tough. It was actually the broadcaster Lord Leslie Riddick was making this point at the Sentencing Commission that, you know, why do people think sentencing, you know, community sentences not tough? As a defence lawyer, I knew lots of youngsters who would say, actually, just give me the time, I'll do it stand my head. You know, 3 square meals, I can watch TV, okay, you're banged up 23 hours out of 24, but no problem. Prison is a deterrent for the first time. Once you've been in prison, it's not a deterrent hereafter, and all the evidence shows that. Once you've been in once, you've crossed the Rubicon. What we've got to do is those who don't need to be in prison because they're not serious offenders and they're not dangerous, then we've got to punish them in the community. You know, it's much tougher to have to go out and do 80 hours hard work with sweat in your brow, repaying the damage that you've done. We've got ourselves into this nonsense that somehow or other, it's a tough sentence to give a laddie 3 months in Barlinnie or Stockton. Actually, it'd be much better to see you got 120 hours picking up litter, painting graffiti, getting out there and do this or that. Say it then, what's the tough sentence? Most of them will say, oh God, I didn't fancy doing the work. So we've got to ram home that message that community sentencing, you know, is not a soft option, it's actually a tough option, and we've got to make that when we bring it in, it actually kicks in. And the problem has been, as I say, it doesn't quite kick in fast enough. So some of it's just attitudinal. I always remember my friend, you know, Roger Houchin, who was the governor of Barlinnie, he tells this story about being in Uganda, and he says, what do you do with these people who murder them as well? And he says, oh well, in Scotland we don't have a death penalty, we detain them.